Part 1. The legend of the dead world. The galaxy was old. Older than most species could truly understand. In its long history, empires had risen and fallen like waves upon a shore. Stars had been born, lived their lives, and died. And through it all, the great civilizations had kept records, passed down stories, and remembered. But some stories were not meant to be remembered. Some were meant to be forgotten. Elder Consul Vethkari sat in her private chambers aboard the Concorde station, reading through ancient texts that had not been opened in centuries. Her scales, normally a deep blue that showed calm and wisdom, had shifted to a troubled gray. Outside her window, ships from 12 different species moved through the darkness of space, going about their business, unaware of the old fears stirring in her mind. The Galactic Concorde had kept peace for 3,000 years. 12 species, each different, each powerful in their own way, had agreed to work together instead of destroying each other. It was not perfect. There were arguments, disputes, and sometimes violence. But it worked. The galaxy was stable, yet the stories persisted. In the oldest archives, written in languages that predated the Concorde itself, there were tales of a 13th species. They called them many names. The enduring ones, the Death World children, the stubborn. But the most common name was simply this: humans. Vethkari had first heard these stories as a young hatchling, sitting at her grandmother's feet. Her grandmother had spoken of a small blue world on the very edge of the galaxy, far from the great civilizations, far from the trade routes, far from everything that mattered. On this world, life had taken a strange and terrible path. The planet itself seemed designed to kill. Massive storms swept across its surface. The ground shook and split open without warning. Mountains of fire erupted and buried entire regions in ash. The seas rose and fell with the pull of a single massive moon, drowning anything too slow to escape. And in this chaos, life had somehow found a way. The humans were the strangest of all. They were soft creatures, without scales or shells or claws. They could not see in the dark. They could not breathe underwater. They could not survive extreme cold or heat. By all logic, they should have died out long before they ever learned to think. But they did not die. They adapted. They made tools. They made fire. They made weapons. And then, strangest of all, they made friends with the very predators that hunted them. They took wolves, dangerous pack hunters, and turned them into loyal companions. They rode upon great beasts that could crush them with a single step. They looked at the death that surrounded them and said, "This is my home. I will not leave." The story said the humans had been surveyed once, long ago, before the Concorde existed. A ship had visited their world when they were still primitive, still building their first cities, still fighting each other with sharpened metal. The surveyors had noted their potential and moved on. There were more interesting species to study, more advanced civilizations to contact. The humans could wait. They waited too long. 800 years ago, Concorde probes returned to the small blue world. What they found was silence. A massive asteroid had struck the planet, throwing dust and debris into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun. The primitive settlements were gone. The great beasts were gone. The humans were gone. The report was filed and forgotten. Another extinction. Another dead world. The galaxy moved on, but the stories never stopped. Traders spoke of ghost ships appearing at the edges of known space. Ships that matched no known design. Ships that vanished before they could be scanned. Explorers told tales of finding old human artifacts on worlds they should never have reached. And sometimes, in the deep dark between stars, long-range sensors would pick up signals. Faint signals. Organized signals. Signals that came from a system that was supposed to be empty. Vethkari had dismissed these reports for decades. She had built her career on logic, on evidence, on facts that could be proven. Ghost stories were for children. The humans were dead. End of discussion. Then the Kethver hegemony went to war. The Kethver were insects, massive, armored, and utterly without mercy. They had been part of the Concord since its founding, but they had never truly accepted it. They saw other species as weak, inferior, fit only to serve or die. For 3,000 years, they had waited, building their strength, preparing for the moment when they could take what they believed was rightfully theirs. That moment came on a quiet morning when Kethver warships appeared above the Veleth homeworld. The Veleth were peaceful. They were scientists, artists, dreamers. They had no real military, no weapons worth mentioning. They believed the Concord would protect them. They were wrong. The Concord debated. The Concord discussed. The Concord formed committees and subcommittees and emergency sessions that went nowhere. Meanwhile, Veleth cities burned. Veleth children died. Veleth colonies sent desperate distress calls that went unanswered. Vethkari watched it all happen from her comfortable seat on the council. She argued for intervention, but she was outvoted. The Kethver were too strong. The risk was too great. Better to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution, to wait and see. The Veleth could not wait. Colony after colony fell. Millions died. The Kethver were not simply conquering. They were exterminating. They wanted the Veleth gone, erased from history, forgotten like so many species before them. It was during the darkest hour, when all hope seemed lost, that something changed. A Veleth colony called Sanctuary's Hope sent out one final distress call. Kethver ships surrounded the planet. Civilian transports tried to flee and were shot down one by one. The colonists prepared to die. And then, from the darkness of space, from the direction of the dead outer rim, ships appeared. They were like nothing anyone had ever seen. Angular, aggressive, built for war in ways that made Kethver vessels look like toys. They did not ask for permission. They did not announce themselves. They simply arrived, 12 ships against 47, and they opened fire. The battle lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, the Kethver fleet was gone, destroyed, scattered, broken beyond recovery. The strange ships descended towards Sanctuary's Hope, and the surviving Veleth looked up at symbols they recognized only from the oldest stories. A blue circle, a green continent, a small world on the edge of nothing. The humans had returned, and they were not happy. On Concord Station, Vethkari watched the reports come in, her scales cycling through colors she could not control. Fear, shock, and something else. Something that felt almost like hope. The myths were real. The dead world lived, and the galaxy would never be the same. Part 2. First Contact and Fire Commander Yelena Konko had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. She stood on the bridge of the UN's Defiance, the most powerful warship humanity had ever built, and watched the tactical display with cold anger burning in her chest. Below her, the planet Sanctuary's Hope was dying. Cities that had stood for centuries were now nothing but craters and ash. Kethver warships circled the world like hungry predators, firing at anything that moved. Civilian transports, filled with families trying to escape, exploded one after another. The Kethver were not fighting a war. They were committing murder on a scale that made Yellen sick. "Commander," her tactical officer said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "The Kethver are targeting the last evacuation center. Estimated civilian population, 200,000. Mostly children." Yellen closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought about Earth. She thought about the stories her grandmother had told her. Stories of the long dark, the years after the asteroid hit when humanity had almost ceased to exist. They had survived. They had rebuilt. They had sworn that they would never be helpless again, and they had sworn something else too. They would never become the monsters that the universe seemed to create so easily. All ships, the cloak, Yellen ordered. Launch all fighters. And open a channel to the HFY fleet. Full broadcast. I want everyone in this sector to hear what I am about to say. Around the Defiance, 11 other ships shimmered into existence. They had been invisible, hidden by technology that the galaxy could not understand. Now they revealed themselves, massive and bristling with weapons, appearing from nothing like ghosts made solid. The HFY fleet reacted with confusion. Their sensors screamed warnings. These ships were big. These ships were heavily armed. These ships were completely unknown. For the first time in centuries, the HFY faced something they could not identify. Yellen's voice carried across the void, translated into every language known to the galaxy. This is Commander Yellen Okonkwo of the United Nations Space Command. You are engaged in the slaughter of innocent people. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system or face the consequences. This is your only warning. Silence. Then laughter. The HFY Admiral appeared on screen. His insect face twisted into an expression of contempt. He was massive, covered in battle armor that gleamed under the lights of his bridge. Behind him, his officers clicked their mandibles in amusement. Unknown vessels, the Admiral said. You are outnumbered 4-1. Your bluff is pathetic. Surrender now, and I may let some of you live as slaves. Otherwise, you will die screaming. This is the only offer you will receive. Yellen smiled. It was not a nice smile. You misunderstand, she said. That was not an offer. It was a courtesy. She looked at her weapons officer. Target their flagship. Fire. The Defiance's main gun was called the Hammer of God. It fired a slug of dense metal at a speed that was almost impossible to calculate. Powered by technology that humanity had developed in the dark years when they thought they might have to fight the entire galaxy alone. The slug crossed the distance between ships in less than a second. The HFY flagship did not explode. It ceased to exist. One moment it was there, massive and threatening. The next moment, there was only an expanding cloud of atoms. The ship, the Admiral, his entire crew, gone in the time it took to blink. The HFY fleet panicked. Ships broke formation, trying to flee or attack or simply figure out what had just happened. Human fighters swarmed out of their carriers, smaller and faster than anything the HFY had seen. Human weapons fired again and again, each shot finding its target with perfect accuracy. The battle lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes of absolute destruction. 31 HFY ships were reduced to debris. 16 more surrendered, their crews too shocked to fight. Not a single HFY vessel escaped. The human fleet had not lost a single ship. Commander Okonkwo looked at the tactical display, now showing only the wreckage of an enemy fleet and the rescue operations beginning on the planet below. She felt no joy. This was not a moment for celebration. People had died today, many of them before her ships could arrive. Children had burned in the streets of Sanctuary's Hope, while the galaxy's peacekeepers argued about what to do. Send landing parties, she ordered. Full medical support. And contact the Velith government. Tell them. She paused, searching for the right words. Tell them humanity remembers what it is like to be alone and afraid. Tell them they are not alone anymore. On the surface of Sanctuary's Hope, the survivors emerged from their hiding places. They looked up at the sky, at the strange ships descending through the smoke and fire, at the soldiers in powered armor who moved with purpose and discipline. These soldiers were soft-looking, without scales or shells, fragile in appearance. But their weapons were devastating, and their eyes held no fear. An old Velith woman fell to her knees as the first human soldiers approached her shelter. She was shaking, her compound eyes reflecting images of death and destruction that she would never forget. But she was also crying, tears of relief flowing down her face. "You are real," she whispered. "The stories were true. You survived." The soldier who reached her was a young man named Marcus Chun. He was 23 years old, born on a space station orbiting Jupiter, trained from childhood for a moment exactly like this. He knelt beside the old woman and gently took her hand. "We survived," he said, "and we came back. Because someone once told us that the measure of a species is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats strangers in need." He helped her to her feet. "Come on, let us get you somewhere safe." Across Sanctuary's Hope, scenes like this repeated themselves thousands of times. Human soldiers carried Velith children from burning buildings. Human doctors treated wounds with technology that seemed like magic. Human engineers began the work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Word spread quickly. The old stories were true. Humanity had survived. Humanity had returned. And humanity had chosen its first action in the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as protectors. In the great halls of the Concord, the news arrived like a thunderbolt. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in shock. The Kethver, who had seemed unstoppable, had been broken in 4 minutes by a species that was supposed to be extinct. Elder Consul Vethkari received a direct message from Commander Okonkwo. It was short and to the point. "We are coming to talk. We have much to discuss, and the Kethver will answer for what they have done. This is not a request. This is a statement of fact." Vethkari read the message 3 times. Then she called an emergency session of the Concord. For the first time in 3,000 years, the great powers of the galaxy would meet a species they had assumed was dead, and they would have to answer a very simple question. Where had they been when the Velith were dying? Humanity was not interested in excuses. Humanity wanted answers. Part 3. The Council convenes. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord had stood for 3,000 years. It was a monument to cooperation, a symbol of peace, a place where the mightiest species in the galaxy came together to solve their problems with words instead of weapons. Its walls were carved with the histories of 12 civilizations. Its ceiling showed a map of known space, glittering with billions of stars. Today, the chamber was in chaos. Representatives from every member species were shouting at once. Translators struggled to keep up with the flood of accusations, demands, and desperate questions. At the center of the room, a holographic display showed the same footage again and again. Human ships appearing from nowhere. Human weapons destroying a Kethver fleet in minutes. Human soldiers rescuing Velith survivors from the ashes of their world. Elder Consul Vethkari struck her ceremonial staff against the floor, calling for silence. It took several strikes before the noise died down. Her scales had gone pale, showing her deep unease to everyone who could read silent body language. "We must have order," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Panic will not help us. We must address this situation calmly and rationally." "Calmly?" The Velith representative rose from her seat, her compound eyes blazing with fury. "The Kethver murdered 60 million of my people while this council debated procedure. The only reason any of us survived is because beings we thought were myths decided to help us. Do not lecture me about calm." The Kethver ambassador clacked his mandibles in anger. "This is propaganda. Fabricated footage designed to justify aggression against the hegemony. These so-called humans are clearly a creation of the Velith, a deception meant to ambassador." The single word cut through the chamber like a blade. Everyone turned toward the entrance, where a tall figure stood in the doorway. She wore a crisp military uniform, decorated with symbols that matched the ones on the ships in the footage. Her skin was dark brown. Her hair was gray. and her eyes held the weight of centuries of patience finally reaching its end. Admiral Keiichi Adeyemi walked into the chamber of the Galactic Concord like she belonged there. Behind her came two guards in powered armor that made even the largest Kethver look small. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. "I am Admiral Keiichi Adeyemi," she said, "Supreme Commander of the United Nations Space Command. I represent the human species, and I am here to tell you some things you may not want to hear." The Kethver ambassador recovered first. "You have no authority here. You are not a member of the Concord. You have committed acts of war against a fleet that was slaughtering civilians." Admiral Adeyemi interrupted. "Children, Ambassador. Your ships were shooting down transports filled with children. I have the sensor logs. I have the recordings. Would you like me to share them with the chamber?" The ambassador fell silent. Admiral Adeyemi walked to the center of the room, standing directly under the holographic star map. She looked up at it for a moment, then turned to address the full council. "Your surveys were not wrong," she began. "The asteroid impact happened. 97% of all life on Earth died. Cities were destroyed. Civilizations collapsed. For centuries, we lived in the ruins, fighting for every scrap of food, every drop of clean water, every chance to survive one more day." She paused, letting the words sink in. 3% survived. It was not easy. It was not pretty. We did things we are not proud of. But we survived. We rebuilt. We looked up at the stars and remembered that the galaxy had watched us fall and done nothing. Not because you were evil, but because we did not matter to you. We were primitives on a forgotten world, not worth saving. The Molluth representative, an ancient being made of living crystal, spoke in tones like singing glass. "We did not know you survived. If we had known, would you have helped?" Admiral Adeyemi asked. "Honestly, would any of you have risked a war to save a species you had never met?" She shook her head. "We do not blame you for what happened. We had no claim on your protection. But we made a choice. We decided that when we returned to the stars, we would be different. We would not ignore those who needed help. We would not stand by while innocents died." She turned to face the Kethver ambassador directly. "Your hegemony has committed genocide. This is not a matter of debate. I have evidence that your government ordered the extermination of the Velith species. You targeted civilian populations. You shot down evacuation ships. You bombed hospitals and schools." The ambassador started to speak, but Admiral Adeyemi continued without pause. "You will withdraw from all Velith territories within one standard cycle. You will pay reparations for the damage you have caused. You will surrender every officer who gave orders to target civilians. And you will accept independent monitors to ensure you never do anything like this again. And if we refuse," the ambassador demanded, "then my 12 battle groups will do what the Concord was unwilling to do. We will stop you ourselves." "An ambassador?" She leaned closer. "We will not stop at defending the Velith. We will destroy your fleet, occupy your worlds, and hold your entire species accountable for the crimes of your leaders. That is not a threat. It is a promise." The chamber erupted in noise again. Fear, mostly. The footage had shown what human weapons could do. No one wanted to imagine what would happen if that power was turned against them. Elder Consul Vethkari raised her staff for silence. "Admiral, you speak of stopping tyrants and protecting the innocent. But how do we know you will not become tyrants yourselves? You have shown us your strength. What guarantee do we have that you will not use it against us?" Admiral Adeyemi nodded, as if she had expected the question. "None. You have no guarantee. Just as we had no guarantee when we were dying and alone. But I will tell you this. We spent 200 years preparing for this moment, We built weapons that could conquer the galaxy. We developed technology that none of you can match. And we made a decision. We decided that power without purpose is meaningless. We decided that strength without compassion is just another form of weakness. She spread her hands, encompassing the entire chamber. Humanity is offering you an alliance. Not membership in our government. Not submission to our authority. An alliance of equals based on mutual defense and shared values. You protect us, we protect you. You help those in need, we help those in need. Together, we build something better than what existed before. And if we refuse the alliance? The Silene consul asked. Then we returned to watching. But the Kethver still answer for their crimes. That is not negotiable. The vote took 6 hours. There were arguments, debates, and private conversations in back rooms. In the end, 10 species voted in favor of the alliance. The Kethver voted against. The Silene abstained, uncertain but unwilling to oppose Dot as the results were announced. Admiral Adami allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had spent 3,000 years as a ghost story. Now they were partners in building a new future. It was only the beginning. Part 4. The War of Shadows. The Kethver hegemony had been humiliated, but they had not been broken. In the year following the alliance, they launched a new kind of war. Not a war of fleets and open battles, but a war of shadows and secrets. Assassins struck at alliance leaders. Bombs destroyed civilian infrastructure. Strange diseases appeared on colony worlds, killing thousands before cures could be found. The Kethver could not match humanity in direct combat, so they attacked from the darkness, hitting targets that could not fight back. Lieutenant Commander James Kowalczyk led the answer to the Shadow War. His unit was called the Shadow Breakers, a team of soldiers and spies trained to hunt threats that others could not see. They operated in the spaces between stars, following trails of evidence that led to hidden bases and secret operations. James was 35 years old. Born in the underground cities of Europa, where humanity had hidden during the Long Dark. He was tall and lean, with scars on his hands from close combat and eyes that had seen too much death. He did not enjoy violence, but he understood that sometimes violence was necessary to protect those who could not protect themselves. The mission to Nethic Station began like any other. Intelligence suggested the Kethver were hiding weapons in an abandoned mining facility deep in an asteroid field. James and his team were sent to investigate and destroy anything dangerous. What they found was far worse than weapons. The station was not abandoned. It was a laboratory. Thousands of pods lined the walls, each containing a Volith prisoner in frozen sleep. Machines connected to the pods extracted samples, ran experiments, and recorded data. The smell of death hung in the air, mixed with chemicals that made James feel sick. "Sir," one of his team members whispered, her voice shaking. "These readings, they've been experimenting on living subjects. Gene modification. Targeted pathogens. They're trying to create diseases that only kill specific species." James moved deeper into the facility, his weapon raised. The further he went, the worse it became. Not just Velith prisoners now, but samples from every species in the Concord. Silene scales, Mollusk crystals, even human tissue, stolen from who knew where. At the center of the station, he found the command room. Data terminals glowed with information that made his blood run cold. Project Extinction, a plan to develop biological weapons that could wipe out entire species. The Kethver were not just fighting a war. They were planning to end all non-Kethver life in the galaxy. "Command," James transmitted, keeping his voice steady despite what he had seen. "We have a priority situation. The Kethver are developing weapons of mass extinction. Biological agents designed to target specific species. They have samples from everyone. This is not a regional threat. This is a threat to all life in the galaxy. The response came not from his direct commander, but from Admiral Adeyemi herself. Her voice was calm, but James could hear the steel underneath. Confirmed, Shadowbreaker. Transmit all data immediately. I am notifying the Alliance Council. Battle groups are being redirected to your sector. She paused. And Commander? Those prisoners. Get them out. All of them. James looked at the thousands of pods surrounding him. Many of the subjects were too far gone, their bodies damaged beyond repair by the experiments. But some were still alive. Some could still be saved. Yes, Admiral, he said. We will get them out. What followed was the largest coordinated military action in galactic history. Human forces joined by Velith volunteers who wanted revenge and Mala scientists who understood the threat struck simultaneously at 17 Kethver installations. Each one was a laboratory. Each one was part of Project Extinction. The battles were fierce. The Kethver knew they were cornered, and cornered predators fought hardest of all. James and his team faced enemies who would rather die than surrender, who triggered self-destruct sequences rather than let their research be captured. But humanity had not survived the end of their world by giving up when things got difficult. At Nethic Station, James personally led the evacuation of the prisoners. One by one, his team disconnected the pods from the machines and carried them to transport ships. Some of the subjects woke up during the process, confused and terrified, not understanding what was happening. A young Velith girl, no more than a child by her species standards, opened her eyes as James lifted her from her pod. She was weak, barely able to move, but her compound eyes focused on his face with something like wonder. You are warm, she whispered in broken common, the trade language of the galaxy. The story said humans were warm. James felt something catch in his throat. He had seen so much death, so much cruelty, so much evil in this war. But here was this child, rescued from a nightmare, and her first thought was about the old legends. The myths that said humans were different. The stories that said humans would come when no one else would help. Yeah, he said softly, carrying her toward the transport. We are warm, and we are not going anywhere. The war lasted 8 months. 8 months of hunting, fighting, and dying. Human soldiers fell beside their allies, giving their lives for species they had only just met. Alliance forces pushed deeper and deeper into Kethver territory, destroying laboratories, liberating prisoners, and dismantling the machinery of genocide. In the end, it was not a single battle that defeated the hegemony. It was the slow, grinding work of soldiers like James Kalelich, who refused to stop no matter how dark things became. It was the determination of people who had survived the end of their world and knew that nothing was impossible if you were willing to keep fighting. When the Kethver leadership finally surrendered, James was standing on the bridge of a captured enemy station, watching the news feeds announce the end of the war. Around him, his team was quiet. They had lost friends in this fight. They had seen things that would haunt them forever, but they had won. The Alliance had won, and the galaxy was safe. For now, James thought about the Velith child he had carried from Nethic Station. She was recovering in a medical facility, surrounded by others who had been rescued from the Kethver labs. She would have scars, physical and mental, for the rest of her life, but she would have a life. That was what mattered. That was why humanity had come back. Part 5. A new covenant. The war was over. The Kethver hegemony had surrendered. Their fleet was destroyed, their empire occupied, their leaders awaiting trial for crimes against all sentient life. But Ambassador Nkechi Adeyemi knew that winning a war was easy compared to winning the peace. She stood in the rebuilt, great chamber of the Galactic Assembly, looking out at the representatives of 13 species. 13, not 12. Humanity's seat had been added to the chamber, carved from stone taken from Earth itself, a reminder of where they had come from and what they had survived. The chamber looked different now. The old symbols of the Concord had been updated to include human contributions. The star map on the ceiling had been expanded to show the Sol system, no longer a blank spot on the edge of known space, but a full member of galactic civilization. But symbols were not enough. If this new piece was going to last, it needed something more. It needed a foundation built on principles, not just convenience. Ambassador Adami stepped forward to address the assembly. She was older now, the years of war having added lines to her face and white to her hair. But her eyes were still sharp, her voice still strong, and her purpose still clear. 3,000 years ago, she began, humanity was a footnote in your histories. We were primitives on a small world, not worth remembering. When disaster struck our planet, you recorded our extinction and moved on. We do not blame you for this. You did not know us. You owed us nothing. She paused, looking around the chamber at the faces of allies and former enemies. We spent centuries in darkness. We rebuilt our civilization from ashes. We developed technology that you could not imagine because we had no other choice. And when we finally reached the stars again, we found a galaxy that had forgotten we ever existed. Some of you thought we were myths, ghost stories told to frighten children, the monsters from the dead world. A soft murmur passed through the chamber. Some representatives looked uncomfortable, remembering the fear they had felt when human ships first appeared. But we did not come back to be monsters, Ambassador Adami continued. We came back because we remembered what it was like to be alone and afraid. We remembered calling out for help and hearing only silence. And we decided that we would never let anyone else feel that way if we could prevent it. She gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a document written in the languages of all 13 species, outlining a new framework for galactic cooperation. The old Concord failed because it was built on fear. Species joined because they were afraid of war, not because they believed in something greater than themselves. When the Velith needed help, the Concord debated and discussed while millions died. Fear of the Kethver was stronger than commitment to doing what was right. Ambassador Adami's voice grew firmer. The new covenant is different. It is built on a simple principle. When any member faces extinction, when any member faces genocide, when any member faces a threat too great to handle alone, the others will respond. Not because it is convenient, not because it is safe, but because it is right. The Velith representative rose from her seat. She was the same woman who had confronted the Kethver ambassador in that first chaotic meeting years ago. Her eyes still held the memory of everything her people had lost, but they also held hope. The Velith people owe our existence to humanity, she said. When no one else would help us, your ships came. Your soldiers died for our children. We will never forget this. The Velith vote in favor of the new covenant. One by one, the other species followed. The Moleth, ancient and wise, spoke of how humanity had shown them that compassion and strength were not opposites. The Silene, who had abstained from the original alliance vote, admitted that they had been wrong to hesitate. Even the smaller species, those who had always felt overlooked by the great powers, voiced their support. The Kethver representative sat in silence. His species was present as observers, not voting members. They would need decades, perhaps centuries, to prove they could be trusted again. But even he listened as the votes were cast, his insect face unreadable. When the final count was announced, the result was unanimous. Every voting species supported the new covenant. For the first time in galactic history, there was a true alliance, not just a truce. Ambassador Adami allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. This was what humanity had worked toward for so long. Not conquest, not dominance, but partnership. A galaxy where species helped each other, where the strong protected the weak, where no one was left alone in the darkness. After the ceremony, as representatives mingled and discussed the future, the Molith Elder approached her. The ancient being's crystalline body caught the light, creating patterns that suggested deep emotion. "We always wondered," the Molith said, "why humanity was different. Why your species inspired such legends when you were supposed to be extinct. We thought perhaps it was your violence, your capacity for war. Many species are violent." Ambassador Adeyemi waited, sensing that there was more to say. "But I understand now," the Molith continued. "It is not violence that makes you special. It is stubbornness. You survived what should have killed you. You grew strong when you should have died. And when you returned, you chose to protect rather than destroy. That is why we feared you. That is why we now trust you." Ambassador Adeyemi smiled, and this time the expression held warmth. "We are human. Stubbornness is what we do best." Later, as she prepared to leave the great chamber, she received a message from James Kowalczyk. He was stationed at a new outpost near the edge of explored space, training the next generation of soldiers and peacekeepers. The message was short, just a few lines. "Ambassador, you should see this. The Velith girl from Nethik Station, the one I carried out of the lab, she just finished her first day of school. She wants to be a doctor. She says she wants to help people the way humans helped her. I thought you should know." Ambassador Adeyemi read the message twice, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. This was why they had fought. This was why they had sacrificed so much. Not for power or glory or revenge, but for the chance to make things better. For the opportunity to give a frightened child a future. She looked out the window of the great chamber, past the gathered ships from a dozen species, past the stations and satellites that marked the heart of galactic civilization, toward the distant stars that still held so many mysteries. Humanity had returned from the dead. They had ended a war, stopped a genocide, and helped build something new. But they were not finished. There were still species to meet, problems to solve, and challenges to overcome. The galaxy was vast, and there was so much work left to do. But that was fine. Humanity had never been afraid of hard work. They looked at the impossible and said, "Let us try anyway." They faced the darkness and refused to give up. They were human, and they were only getting started.